Welcome to the reality show, day 53 of the war in Israel. Today we're talking about Hamas violating the ceasefire that they asked for in the war that they started. I'm joined by Mark Pellegrino, Marco and Richard, and Robert Nasser. Yeah, I don't know. We knew I mentioned when there was still talk of this to that I said to Daniel, look, we can just pre-record an episode about Hamas violating the ceasefire. There has never there's never been a war or a round of fighting with Hamas in which they did not violate ceasefires. Eventually, there's a ceasefire that they don't violate until a while later, but there's never one where there's no ceasefire that they violate. Um, Robert, your thoughts on this?
Where do I begin? The initial subject here. News articles over the past 24 hours have been celebrating the extension of the ceasefire by an additional 2 days. And people have welcomed this extension with an eye toward it becoming a permanent ceasefire. Many of us from the beginning have been saying the worst outcome of the October 7th massacre would be if this just shows up as another little dash in the timeline, the history of the Middle East. Oh, yeah. On October 7th in 2023, there was an attack by Hamas from Gaza. 1,500 people were killed. A couple hundred people were taken hostage. Eventually, most of them, at least the ones who didn't die in captivity, were released. And now it's just another entry in that interesting timeline. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong, and nothing ever changes. Why on earth would we be celebrating the extension of 2 more days of a ceasefire? What the hell do people think is going to happen in response to this? It is insanity that we are engaged in this ceasefire, in these hostage negotiations. It is insanity that people are celebrating the fact that this has been extended out. The ceasefire, the only valid ceasefire would be you ceasefire, you get your hostages back, and then you wipe Hamas off of the history books, even if that means wiping Gaza, which it doesn't, but even if it meant wiping Gaza off the map, that would be the only valid quote unquote ceasefire. I think that makes my position clear.
Yeah, by the way, there's a reason why this ceasefire, which was temporary, it's a few days. Hamas doesn't need much more than that to regroup. There's a reason why it was never going to be a deal that involved returning all the hostages, because Hamas knows that if there are no hostages in Gaza, Israel would be, at least in terms of Israeli public opinion, more free to act, against Hamas in Gaza, regardless of civilian casualties. Marco, Richard.
Yeah, well, Robert covered it quite well. I personally find it really upsetting that we are being stringed along by this bunch of Islamic monsters who are now saying, "Oh yeah, we're quite happy to have a ceasefire." They're effectively dictating the terms. The people from Gaza, the Islamist monsters, first go into Israel and kidnap children and old people and innocent guys, and then they are trying to look good on the global in front of the whole world, trying to show how understanding, how open to peace they are. It's like, guys, they're just returning after over a month the people that they stole from their own homes. I mean, this is not a kindness. This is just another movement in this terrible game that we allow to continue. Bear in mind that the people that Israel are freeing and sending back to Palestine are people who try to blow themselves up in checkpoints, people who threw petrol bombs to the IDF officials, people who murdered their teachers in front of many witnesses. So out of the jails of Israel are people who are going back into Gaza. And what they're going to do? Well, they put on a clean uniform. They're going to come out in a few weeks' time and create havoc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that the ceasefire was obviously broken on October the 7th by Hamas. That was the major break of a ceasefire, if you want to call it that. This one is a mere blip in the process, and it's October 7th isn't even considered Hamas breaking a ceasefire. So it's no wonder that we're what's happening right now is white noise after the event, because October 7th was the significant factor here. And that's what should have changed the utter way in which the process was run thereafter by Israel but by its supporters in the West. And of course, we've seen the exact opposite of that. We've seen everything we predicted on this channel was going to happen, has happened, more or less in the order as predicted. That's a depressing outcome.
Yeah, I will just update that whatever violation of the ceasefire happened, there is the exchange is now happening, and the 10 hostages that were going to be released today are released, and then 30 terrorists are being released from Israeli prisons. Mark.
I mean, to me, this entire thing is disgraceful. I feel like we're in the midst of seeing one of the great world democracies being brought down by the despicable and pathological ethics of altruism. It should demonstrate to any objectivist out there, to anybody with a mind, that this is the ideal that we have to attack at its roots. I wanted to take what Robert said and go even further. There's only one valid ceasefire, and that's the unconditional surrender of Hamas. The only valid ceasefire is when every last person who has invested invested themselves in Hamas is dead and or in jail and ready to be tried for crimes against humanity and hanged from the highest crane. That is the only valid ceasefire there can be. Everything else just plays into the hands of these pathotypes who, as Marco said, I think Richard might have said it as well, they're humanitarian relief is the last thing on their mind. A pathotype doesn't have empathy towards their fellow man. They have an agenda that they want to push onto the world, and they're going to do that by any means necessary. And I think right now we're in the midst of seeing the momentum that the IDF had being stalled, tragically so. I don't know if they're ever going to pick it up again, especially now that world opinion has turned against them. And I really don't have high hopes that Hamas is going to be kicked off out of Gaza and driven into the sea and drowned and left there to be shark bait, which is what I think they deserve. I think we're going to see just a continuation of the status quo, which to most people in the world is somehow acceptable. Perennial warfare is somehow acceptable.
Just reading a little bit of news updates, and yeah, so in Israel, basically the agreement was for 4 days, and then with an option to extend it to 10 days, with 10 hostages being released every day. Now there was somebody who was in Israel was being asked about extending it. Israel is open to extending it, but there's a reason, I think, on Hamas's side why, and I mentioned this, there's a reason why it's limited to that, because Hamas does not want to release everybody. They can't afford to do that. Now, I do think, Robert, you said something about this being, like similar rounds. It's more has been done. Now, more has been done, on both sides, so to speak, because Hamas did something on a much larger scale than they had ever done before. Israel has caused more harm to Hamas than they have in previous rounds, and the rhetoric is different, because officially Israel is still talking about destroying Hamas, and nothing else will be acceptable to Israel, and even if and we'll keep the ceasefire as long as we get hostages back, but eventually we will go all in. That is the position that Israel is expressing. So Yeah, I don't like the way this war is being fought. Again, I don't think it should be limited to the Gaza Strip and to Hamas. So even if Hamas in Gaza is destroyed, there is still Hamas has a big presence in the West Bank. They their brothers in arms in Hezbollah. Another update I just saw was a member of parliament in Lebanon from Hezbollah said he hopes the ceasefire will continue. That should tell you enough. Like the fact that the terrorists, the fact that they're their biggest mouthpieces in the West, like Jeremy Corbyn, the fact that these people want a ceasefire, usually tells you that something bad is happening. Mark, I know you're about to leave. Do you have any last comments right before we?
No, you're taking the words right out of my mouth. The enemy is, of course, wider than just Hamas. We're going to have to confront these fools, these pathological, murderous scum. Sometime you can't keep kicking the can down the road. The more you kick it down the road, the more you risk injuring and or killing innocent people. It's despicable that this is what we're doing, that this is considered the high road, the moral high road. It's not, it's the low road. Sorry to say, but we have to take this war to them and end them. That's the only solution to this problem. And very few people in the media are actually expressing this sentiment. Very few. A little bit on Fox, not so much everywhere else. Everywhere else is focusing on humanitarian issues in Gaza.
Yeah, and Catherine said in the super chat, what you mentioned earlier, she asked, will Israel go after Iran? Well, if you're asking, will they? No, they won't. But should they? Yes, that should be the first target. But again, I've said this about the U.S. Support of Israel, which I've said earlier on in this war, I think is better than ever before, but not enough. And what Israel should have said to the U.S. is, look, we'll take care of Hamas, we'll take care of Hezbollah, we'll take care of whoever we have to take care of in the West Bank. We can take care of the Houthis in Yemen. Iran needs to be dealt with. We'd rather you do it, but if not, we'll do it, and we'll do it in a way that you won't like, because that's the only way we can do it. Israel can't go to war in Iran with ground troops and with tanks and so on. Israel can defeat Iran with nuclear bombs. So I think that would have been a good policy on Israel's part, saying we appreciate your friendship. Here's a good chance to prove it.
Amen to that. I mean, somebody's got to take out Iran's oil capacity. They got to take out their air force, take out their infrastructure, and then let's march in there and free Iran. Free Iran, but free Iran so that Americans and citizens in free societies around the world can finally be done with terrorism, with this Islamicist, Arabo nationalist, fascist crap. I'm done with it. I hope there's a majority of folks that are done with it as well. Otherwise, we're just asking for violence forever.
Yeah, and we were talking on the Daily Objective about Hamas being a true representative of the Palestinian people, and I think Iran is the one place in the Middle East where that is that is the exception. Like, not the people are not all our enemies. And we see that in that many of them are risking their lives and actually dying trying to remove this regime on their own. If the Iranian regime is removed, there will be people there who we can actually talk to, who can actually have a real peace with, which we can't have. We, as in Israel, as in the West, can't have that with the people in Gaza and the people in the West Bank.
I'll say this in parting because I have to go, but I wish the men of the West had balls the equivalent size of the women of Iran. All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Mark. I think, I don't want to talk for Mark, but I think that was a metaphor and he wasn't referring to the trans movement in Iran. Marco, Richard, any additional thoughts?
Well, Mark has got a point there. However, my worry is that this can hasn't got many more kicks in it. If we get to the point where Iran has developed some sort of nuclear capability, do you really think they're gonna worry about international opinion and not use it as soon as they can. I think we're so running out of time here. So if something's not done fairly soon, we're gonna live to regret it. And I'm afraid that's probably, I begin to think that during my lifetime we're gonna see something really big and something really painful. You know, we've been lucky. We lived in a golden age where there was some sort of reasons to, but now things seems to have gone spiraling out of control. If you look at the kind of comments we see in the videos in this channel and the other one, the kind of polarization, the kind of lack of debate, we're up against people who just, I don't know, it's like dealing with a bunch of crazed up orangutans. It's like they don't make a point. It's just literally fly my flags in your face because it's my flag. There's no intellectual debate at all. So we're left to a point where how can you make an argument with people who are totally totally non-receptive to any sort of debate?
Just a quick follow-up, Marco. When you're talking about the comments, have you been reading the comments from yesterday's Daily Objective? Is that where this is coming from?
Well, actually, if you go along the last month or so, the level of the conversation going on is just lots of people are either threatening you to die in the sands or whatever. Some other people send you to hell. I mean, it's a surge of sort of bullyism going on and some religious wackiness. It's just
yeah. Yesterday's Finkelstein comments are an extreme example of that, and there's plenty of them there. But yeah, they're definitely, they're so polarized, and they are, like Marco says, they're like trying to reason with some crazed bunch of football hooligans who only want to smash your head in, and that's the end of it. It's not possible to debate in such a circumstance. You can see the tribalism for what it is because it calls its name loud and clear. But it's obviously carrying a lot of other people along with it, and that's what's so depressing. Where you wouldn't see a chunk of people supporting a load of football hooligans, like you're seeing in the case of the Hamas supporters, and it's also the ability to use propaganda, which is so chilling. When you see how the hostages are released, when you see how they're told to wave as they depart, when you see all of the elements that make those releasing them look like the good guys when they took them in the first place, and it's sickening to see how easily that's bought into. Why that isn't called out at every juncture by anybody reporting on it. I mean, if I were in the situation where Marco, for example, had been taken as a hostage, if he were released, there is no way I would allow a single bloody camera to show us being reunited. If I could possibly organise, because I would not want that moment to be a piece of propaganda that was then used to justify Christ knows what in terms of the arguments that the hostage takers were doing the honourable thing by releasing him in the first place.
Yeah, although the moment they're reunited, that's filmed by people in Israel. That's already in Israel. There is propaganda of them, right before the release when they're handed over to the Red Cross. And yeah, now the stories are coming out of how they were treated, and of course these are really.
But even if that reuniting is filmed in Israel and is filmed to use to helps the Israeli government justify why they've negotiated, why they've released the Palestinian prisoners in the first place, that's still all wrong, isn't it? You're still offering propaganda to Hamas, but by choosing to make it done in such a manner.
And take the reporting from the BBC, for example. They actively use this kind of footage to say, oh, Hamas is releasing, look how nice they are, how happy we are when they reunite, all thanks to Hamas. It's like, what?
And then some of those comments we're talking about in the other videos and by people like Owen Jones and all those kind of people is that look how well the hostages look like. They're saying goodbye to their captors when they depart. Obviously, they weren't treated badly. Obviously, the Israelis are lying about how they're treated. So, and you've written the script for them. It boils my blood.
It was very difficult for me on yesterday's episode of the Daily Objective not to go into a stream of swear words. So thanks for bringing up Owen Jones and putting me up against that challenge once again. By the way, you're also being unfair to football hooligans. Marco, you mentioned that Iran will use nukes as soon as it has them. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how exactly. I don't know if Iran itself would nuke Israel, because I think that will be a problem for them, but they have their proxies, and again, October 7th is an Iranian attack. It's Iranian funded, it's Iranian approved. Hamas would never do anything like that without at least the approval from Iran, and they were trained in Iran or trained by Iran. And October 7th is the equivalent of using a nuke in the sense that this is the most Jews that they could have killed on that day. Had it been a nuke, they would have done that. So yes, there's no doubt the goal of these people is to kill as many Jews as possible until none are left.
But it's not just the nuke itself. It's not the actual nuclear capability of an explosive. All you need, just a dirty bomb. If you explode something which makes the area unlivable, that they won already, haven't they?
Yeah, and we'll get to this. I guess at some point we'll cover this topic, but the question of many Arab Israelis, I think many Arab Israelis are very happy to be Arab Israelis and not Arab Jordanians or Arab Lebanese or Arab any other Arab country. But there are many among them who are not on the side of Israel. So the use of a dirty bomb or any attack, I mean, many helped with the October 7th attacks. And Israel has an enemy within, not just with its leftist fifth column, but among Jews, but also many among the Arab population. Robert. If we had more Robert Nasser like Arabs in Israel, we'd be better off. Actually, in Michigan as well, from what I hear, you are in a minority among the Arab community.
Yeah, I've got to say, because a lot of folks have expressed concern about Dearborn ragheads. When you're an Arab, you get to call them that. You don't get to call them that. I get to call them that. When my fellow towelheads here in Dearborn, Michigan, come out, 98% of the city of Dearborn is where you want to be, including the Arabic population. And we have the Henry Ford, we have Greenfield Village, we have all these institutions. It's a beautiful place. There are crazies on the fringe. There's a couple neighborhoods on the far east side border of Detroit I wouldn't go into, but don't get the idea that Dearborn, Michigan is as bad, for example, as the radical, militant, butcherous American college campuses. It's not that bad. Seriously, I'm exaggerating, but only a little bit. But since you called me out, Mark had asked, well, where are the pro-Israeli Gazans? Where are the pro-Israel Arabs in the Middle East? And the answer is, well, probably in Gaza, certainly in the West Bank. As soon as they come out, they are accused of being spies for the other side, and they are murdered. That's what happens to the pro-Israeli Arabs in the West Bank, and I'm sure it's even worse in Gaza. Marco used the expression orangutans. Ayn Rand was criticized for calling, for example, certain tribes of Native Americans savages. Well, that's what people are missing right now. That's what our reporters refuse to fully digest and accept. We'll talk about, maybe we'll want to get into the Iris Tasia, Leo Varadkar. The people don't know what that word is. The Prime Minister of Ireland is using very gentle language turns out, Ireland has a history of that, going back to when they did not criticize Nazism well after it was well known. I know we're cutting into the second topic, but I want to make the point that this language of neutrality, which our reporters want to cling to, this is despicable. Israeli hostages weren't lost, as the Taysha wants to say. They were taken. The Israeli deceased. People cannot, and we will not let them forget this. On October 7th, the deceased were not lost. They weren't even killed in a military action. They were murdered. They were butchered. They were slaughtered, massacred, and raped, and burnt alive, and tortured, and in front of their parents or children, or both. This is not, we talk about the numbers. More Jews were killed in this action as a percentage of population than any time going back to World War II. And the numbers matter. But it's not like 1,500 soldiers who took a job with a substantial risk and went into battle and unfortunately were lost. These are 1,500 people, civilians, murdered, slaughtered, massacred. There's no equivalence to be drawn there. Just like there is no equivalence to be drawn between the hostages that are quote unquote being released. I don't even like the idea of such a emotionless word being applied, and compare that to the people that are being released by Israel. At best, criminals, and at worst, outright enemies of the state. Let me just make one more point, because it relates to what we've already been saying. Artificial intelligence. Well, why the hell do you bring up AI? Because AI is making this more urgent. Deep fakes, the ability to produce video of anything, or video that excuses anything. We're already at a point where videos and audio telephone calls of the slaughter that happened on October 7th were released. By the IDF, by Israel? No, by the Gazans themselves, bragging about killing people, destroying families, burning people alive, released by the Gazan, Hamas. We're getting to the point now where people are denying what's right in front of their eyes. It's going to be that much easier as it gets easier and easier to fake this. Mark said, and as I said too, it looks like the way this is being handled, and if things don't turn around and improve, this will be just another entry in the history book in a long history. Well, the problem is we're getting to the point now where if it's not solved now, it's never going to be solved. Which is why we need to keep speaking out. We need to keep encouraging our leaders not to compromise, not to forget what happened on October 7th. It was not just a military action by warring factions. This is different. This is something else altogether. And there's people say, what's the solution? Two-state solution, one-state solution. The solution is Israel wins this war, and there's only one way to win a war, and that is to wipe out the enemy. You can win certain wars, territorial wars, by bringing the enemy to their knees and they agree to accept you. This is not going to happen. Hamas has to be ended. Hezbollah has to be ended. And there needs to be no doubt about who won the war and what's going to happen if anybody ever tries this again. Israel has that power, especially if the United States will be a proper ally. For Christ's sake, we've got the largest aircraft carrier in the world sitting in the Mediterranean. Why on God's green earth are we not using it right now to maximum effect? There is no other workable outcome. This war needs to be fought. It needs to be won, regardless of where we're at today with the ceasefire and the hostages, which is only going to make things worse, meaning more and more hostages in the future. No, this war needs to be ended, and there's only one way to end it.
So Robert, you did jump over to the second topic there, but I do appreciate that you were the one to try to pronounce the Irish word for prime minister. As I've said on recent shows, for me to pronounce foreign words and or embarrass myself trying to pronounce them, we do have $100 super chat minimum. Speaking of which, thank you, Jonathan, for the very generous super chat. Not enough for me to speak foreign languages, but generous nonetheless. By the way, it is November 28th, is it? Or it's the end of the month. So any super chats we receive now will arrive at the ARCUK bank account around Christmas. So consider it a Christmas present, and yeah, it does help us do what we do. So thank you. We appreciate the super chats, and yeah, $100, and I'll start speaking whatever language you want. But yeah, let's go to Ireland, and let's not actually go to Ireland. I'm gonna skip that trip, but let's talk about Ireland. I try not to, like, of the things I try to skip when I follow the news, anything related to Ireland is among that. Ireland is historically and currently on the side of terrorists. They there's a reason for that solidarity. They themselves have some experience in the terrorism business, but yeah, again, even reading about where the people stand there, the football team or soccer team for the American people in the audience that I support back in Israel, the manager is an Irish, one of the biggest stars in Irish football history, and he basically has to remain silent at the moment, because if he actually he's very careful with what he says. There were some fans of the team who were held hostage and then were released, and he expressed his support for that and met them, but he very much he is in trouble. And he was actually, it was major news in Ireland when he was appointed, because how dare he go manage an Israeli team when the Palestinians are suffering or whatever. Marco, Richard, you guys live about halfway between where I am and Ireland. So any any perspective from close to the border?
I think the good news here that even if you got a brain the size of a nut, you can become a prime minister. So happy days. Lots of people up for a job. It's quite astounding that guy. I mean, I'm no fan of Leo at all. In fact, I actually despise the guy. But it's incredible that you are a prime minister and you are so churlish in the use of words. The guy tweeted about a girl who's been returned from a capture in Gaza. She's been returned to Israel. And he says something like, "Oh, the girl was lost and now she's been returned," or something.
She's been found.
She's been found. I mean, it's like, are you totally disconnected from reality, or are you just stupid? It effectively totally wipes out the fact that she was kidnapped, a little girl kidnapped and kept in captivity for over a month, and the fact that she's returned is something that we should celebrate as a gift from the people of Gaza. It's just astounding. And then when he was called out about his stupid statement, he says something like, "Oh, people will understand what I'm talking about." Honestly, what's going on out there? What's going on with people who are unable to stick to a shred of a principle, or just act according to, I can't even understand how people who are supposed to go on the side start saying things like, "Oh, we can allow a little of belief into objectivism." People saying, "Oh, Ayn Rand never claimed that Islam is bad." It's like, have I just landed for a different planet? Haven't you read that she's against religion, that Islam is religion? So can't you make the jump, taking the principle religion is bad? It doesn't matter what the religion is; it's still bad. People don't seem to work out that if a principle applies to every single concrete. It's just, I don't get it.
So I don't know who the last point was in reference to, because I haven't seen anybody say that. But just in terms of the Prime Minister of Ireland, you mentioned, his statement was stupid, or he's unable to. Yeah, it's not stupid, not unable. Evil. He knows exactly what he's saying. He knew exactly how to word. These people, they don't speak off the cuff, and they certainly don't post written messages off the cuff. So yeah, he knew what he was doing. This girl is the girl we've spoken about on this channel a few times. We saw her father early on in the first week of the war, when they told him that she was dead, and he in that interview said that he shouted yes because he thought something that would be worse than death would be to be held by these animals. I don't know if that's his word, but it's mine.
I, I like to give him the benefit of the doubt and not assume he's just being evil. I just assume he's just being stupid, because it's that would be such a level of evil that I can't even imagine somebody in his position be that bad. It's just I prefer, I don't know, perhaps it's just me being evaded on this point, but
Yeah, if I could make a comment on that, because you're absolutely right, and the answer is somewhere between, Marco, what you're wondering and what Razi's saying. I don't know that all of for example, our reporters are willfully, gleefully, evil, but they are evil in the sense that they are willing to evade this to a massive degree. It reminds me of Southern racists who say, well, slavery, they didn't have it so bad. Or imagine for a second, I don't know who in the group has children. If somebody kidnapped my daughter, how well she was being treated would not be part of my calculations in terms of getting her back and in terms of what justice needs to happen. I don't care if it's somebody's grandmother watching over her, feeding her cookies. I want to know who did it. I want to know what it's going to take to get her back. And I want to know, once that's accomplished, how hard it's going to be for the justice system to either lock this person away forever or put a bullet in their head. And our reporters refuse to accept that. And I know these people have children of their own. They refuse to accept that there are children. To hell with it, the fact that it's, well, no, let's include that. The fact that they are children and adults still being held hostage, and that people are making excuses or minimizing it, using the language, for example, of the Taysha, that, well, they're lost, and maybe they'll be found. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but this idea of minimizing what taking people hostage in a worse than military action means is just, as Razi says, it's evil. I don't know that it's willfully evil. They are making excuses, but they are making excuses and evasions at the level of evil.
Well, that makes it evil. I mean, if they're
Yes.
evading, to that degree, it is evil. And with journalists, actually, let me. I'll go to Richard and I'll think through my rant on journalists.
I think one thing I noticed is at the end of Leo Varadkar's statement about this Irish Israeli girl that was released, where he made that comment, he says, "Our prayers have been answered," and that helps unpick a chunk of what the motivation is in many ways, because there's a lot of religion tied up in this. There's a lot of altruism. There's a lot, and that's what makes them gloss over the evil and try and exaggerate the other side and create some artificial moral equivalence, because it does make it sound as if this girl was lost in a wood and was found afterwards, and our prayers have been answered. Well, honestly, it's just. So yeah, I mean, I can understand everything of what you guys are saying, and I think when you have a benevolent universe premise, when you think the best of the world, it is very hard to look at people and see the darkest motives in them and see the most evil motives in them. You can see that in Hamas, and you can see that in their actions. That's unquestionable. but when it comes to the second tier of people, you're always inclined, maybe wrongly, and there's a scale, and it depends on who you're talking about and what they're saying and what the full context is. But maybe you are inclined sometimes to offer them more slack than they deserve, and maybe sometimes we're too ready to jump on people in other circumstances, particularly among friends or family when making a throwaway remark, for example. But all of it is a symptom of the culture and where we're heading, and the fact that people aren't clearly able to lay out what their principles are and understand really the full basis, to pull back from everything. And they shouldn't be looking at things in isolated throwaway remarks. They shouldn't be reacting on the spur of the cuff to what's just been happened. They should know what they think, because they should be able to see the proper big picture based on having a proper understanding of their own principles in the world.
So you say, it's easy to see that level of evil in people like Hamas, but it's more difficult in the second tier. Now, in the second tier is where I put the journalists, and the journalists see everything we see and then some, and yet they report the way they choose to report, and they I'll go back to the most in-your-face example, recent example, which is Kay Burley and her incredibly really difficult to believe question that she actually said something like that on the air, knowing that Israel is releasing terrorists, not terrorists who were not successful enough in their terrorist attack so that their victims didn't die, but still terrorists who attempted to murder people. And she knows who the hostages are, and yet she says this is Israel valuing Palestinian lives less than because this is what Hamas. These are the numbers that Hamas demanded, and the numbers that Israel agreed to. So yeah, I definitely put Kay Burley at a different level of evil, and in a sense, if I don't know how this is going to sound, but in a sense, if you were born in Gaza and indoctrinated your whole life, and then at the age of 16 or 17 you go into Israel and start murdering, you're somebody who should be killed as soon as possible. But such a person has more of an excuse than the Kay Burleys of the world, who in her 40s, 50s, I don't know how old she is, definitely well over 40. This is what she chooses to do in the UK, in a free country where there was a rise in anti-Semitic attacks, in large part, with the Western, with the media in this country adding that fuel to the fire. So yeah, I absolutely put her in the category of evil. And the people I put in the absolute category of good are our super chatters. Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Daniel. And of course, I put ourselves in the category of the good as well. We are fighting for a good cause, and as I've said, I was much more optimistic a couple of months ago than I am now. But on the other hand, I think as long as we are here, we should fight back.
And yeah, absolutely. And when looking at this kind of story, and we're looking at Ireland itself, there is an ability for people to hide the truth over a long period of time, or at least not necessarily outwardly hide it, but not shine a light on it. I wonder how many people actually know that Ireland was neutral in the Second World War, for example. Because I mean, lots of people will cite Switzerland or something as being neutral, but very few will pick on Ireland as being neutral. And certainly, all of the history of Irish leaders, giving condolences when Hitler died and that kind of thing is certainly something I'd never heard until reading up on articles ahead of today's program. So I think there's a lot of deliberate fudging over time, and some people can get away with things that they've done in their past as countries or as individuals or whatever, for far longer, because they've got a legion of people prepared to cover up for them in the media and in academia, and because it doesn't fit the narrative. Those people should be seen on the good side according to many parameters, and therefore will conceal all of their errors in the past and or worse.
Marco.
Well, personally, the fact that Ireland or whatever the Prime Minister of Ireland was, or President, whoever he was friendly towards Hitler, that doesn't surprise me in the least, because Ireland was a very Catholic country, and we know that the Vatican didn't exactly stand up to Hitler, so that doesn't come as a surprise to me.
How many people know that as a second fact? But yes.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a total lack of. I struggle to understand what's going on right now. Why there's so much evasion out there? Well, I'm trying to make some sense into it. I just can't get my head around it. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think one thing that struck me is that we just covered recently in the book club the section when Ellsworth Toohey talks about evil, and he talks about what his aim is in terms of making the next person think what the next person thinks, what the next person thinks. And always nobody is actually thinking. They're just parroting, copying. They're simply imitating the person next to them. So nobody anymore, no individual anymore is using their own mind, their own ability to discern truth from lies. And it feels that you're definitely seeing that stage writ large.
But then again, you know, like your friend Owen, what makes somebody like him ignore the evidence? Why so many people don't realize that when they go and chant against Israel, they actually be anti-Semitic? Why don't you realize that even if you're a lefty and you're going to this demonstration with these brownish skinned people, which makes you feel so good and so liberal, why don't you realize that actually you align yourself to the worst kind of people?
And people like Owen Jones, who are among the group of journalists who I've understood have been to see the footage that the Israelis have shown, the 45-minute footage of what happened on October 7th, to a select group of journalists, or to whichever journalists are prepared to go and look at it or wish to go and look at it. He went to see that allegedly, and they came out with a whole bunch of excuses about you don't see this, you don't see that, as if he wanted it to be more graphic than it was. Now that definitely, obviously, puts him in the thorough category of evil that we're talking about earlier.
I've seen tweets from somebody in Novara Media, the another really evil organization, where what's her name? Ash Sarkar is one of the leading figures, and this is the organization that promotes what they call fully automated luxury communism. So besides, if you put aside how ridiculous it sounds, the word communism is there, which should tell you enough. But yeah, they are fully on the side of Islamic terrorists on this, to the point where they, of course, lie about what Israel supposedly does, and then to the extent that they actually there's any truth in what they say about what is happening in Gaza, they are blaming Israel as opposed to the people causing it. And then, of course, when when they talk about Hamas atrocities, they lie about it. One person in Novara Media on October 7th actually praised the attacks, and then was told to not do that. But yeah, we know what you think, people in Novara. We know where you stand, and yeah, you are a part of the problem in this country. Robert.
You know, to answer the question that Marco and Richard were good enough to raise, because we wonder how can people do these things, and how can they be evil when they see evil and decide to embrace the evil or excuse the evil. In Dante's Inferno, you have the rungs of hell, the levels of hell. And because in objectivism, we not only know what evil looks like, we know where it comes from. And where it comes from is binary. It's you either embraced thinking about reality or you evaded or drifted, which amounts to the same thing. It all sounds very binary. Now, fortunately, if you've read Opar or you've listened to Leonard Peikoff's The Virtue of Justice lecture, which was the source material for his chapter, not all evil is created the same. People who evade on the level of our news reporters are doing something different than the people in Hamas. And your test for that is put these people out in the field. Even if they'd be willing to put a gun in their hand and handle a weapon, they would be the last people to actually shoot anybody. And yet it's all too easy to say, well, yeah, but because of their reporting, they are unleashing the monsters. I say this just to make the point. I think Michael Leibowitz would appreciate this. It's all too easy to be simplistic because, yes, they're both evil, but they're not the same kind of evil. They're not the same level of evil, but more important, they're not the same kind, the same type of evil. Again, Leonard Peikoff's lectures on this are outstanding. If you're starting to feel like, well, I've got to see everything as either they're for us or against us, and everybody who's against us is equally evil, equally bad, whether it's the people in Dearborn, Michigan, or our college students, or our news reporters in the UK, they're all exactly the same as the soldiers of Hamas. Or the citizens, the civilians in Hamas or in Gaza are the same as the militants in Hamas. And we can say that, and there's a kernel of truth. There's something real behind it all. And yet, if we look at it that way, none of this makes any sense. Not in the sense of good and evil. We can't even understand it. We can't even process it. So we need to be willing to say, for example, Immanuel Kant would never have actually struck somebody in the head, much less put a bullet in his brain. So he's a different kind of evil than an Adolf Hitler. And I say that again because none of this makes any sense unless we are willing to look at it with that degree of analysis, with that kind of complexity. I'll use the forbidden word, nuance. Again, it's why I kind of like when Michael will put a poison pill in a conversation, because he's usually just saying, you know what, everything we're saying is right, but there's something we're missing. These reporters do deserve to be denounced. They should be thrown out of their jobs. They should be denounced as being partially responsible for what's happening out there. But the only way to understand, well, how can they do it? Unless they're willfully evil, unless they really want to destroy the world. Well, no, that's not what's going on there. There is a deeper explanation. And fortunately, we, knowing something about philosophy, are just the ones to be able to say, well, no, they're simply evading this and accepting this narrative of Palestinian history, which also requires evasions of this, and this, not just these facts in the history, but these philosophical truths about identity and justice. It's complicated, but it is understandable. And that makes it no less disgraceful. It makes it more disgraceful once we understand, okay, here's what's going on with the intellectuals. Here's what's going on with the students. Here's what's going on with the protesters. And here's what's going on with the militants. It ain't easy, but we can do it. And we have to do it. We have to say more than just, you're either for us or against us if we're going to win this battle.
So ideally, we would have more than 2.5 minutes left of the show, and then we can open that up. I mean, I think maybe Novara actually deserves an episode on this show. They are prominent enough in the UK. They're very prominent, you know, certainly. As far as movements go, and again, considering what it is they promote. They are certainly prominent enough for us to talk about, but we will do that a different day. Marco, you had something to add.
Well, just quickly, that I mean, we know about evasion, reading Ayn Rand, you know, doing courses and stuff like that with Peikoff and all the kind of stuff. But it always staggers you when you actually see so many examples of evasion. Your mind can conceive that there can be so many examples, so many ways people can evade, and that's quite overwhelming. And you know, it's very hard to digest, really.
Richard, any parting thoughts?
No, just a second. Everything that well, particularly Robert just said there, for laying out the two types, and the fact that this is not easy, and this is not, you know, not to say that we don't find journalists, and even what Leah Vradka said, utterly repellent, and proof of a terrible situation in the culture, and a terrible inability to see morality for what it is. So yeah.
Well, we mentioned on this show the comments on yesterday's episode of the Daily Objective that were at around 140 of them last time I checked. Yeah, that's I wouldn't engage with most of them. What people do is up to them. But I do encourage our audience to look at them. They're interesting as an insight into the minds of who we're dealing with among those who probably aren't actually themselves out there committing terrorist attacks. I'll also say that there was an episode of the Daily Objective from years ago of Nikos talking about, the title of that is How I Changed My Mind on the Arab-Israeli Conflict. That episode has been doing well recently, and it's interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch in the historical context. As people know, I don't necessarily agree with Nikos on everything. Well, I disagree with Nikos on a lot, but even on this topic, I don't necessarily agree with him on everything. But yeah, that video, the link to that video is in the live chat right now for people watching live. You can click that, put it on pause, join the Fountainhead Book Club, and then watch it later on. But I do recommend watching it. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Richard. We will be back here tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show.
Thank you. Bye-bye.